Somewhere on the long climb up Fancy Gap, a McLean driver climbed down out of his cab, tied a rope to his own front bumper, and started up the mountain on foot, leaning into that rope like he was dragging the loaded rig up the grade behind him. His partner kept it crawling along in the lowest gear it had. Someone on the shoulder took a picture. It ran on the front page of the Winston-Salem paper. Both men were fired by the next week, and the Teamsters had their jobs back before it was over. Old McLean men still swear that one happened, and it's the kind of story that follows the double diamond around. That was the CB handle for McLean Trucking, and the men who ran it traded stories like that because the trucks gave them plenty of material. They were the rigs other outfits laughed at. The old hands will tell you the company ran GMC tractors with little 471 Detroits while the competition pulled the same grades on 671s, and a four-cylinder Detroit screaming up a loaded hill is a sound a man doesn't forget. Underpowered, the rivals called them. The McLean drivers called them home. An outfit that runs trucks the competition laughs at tends to grow a chip on its shoulder and a tight kind of loyalty, and McLean had both. Here's what doesn't add up. That underdog outfit, the one with the joke trucks and the man on the rope, wasn't small. By the 1980s, it was one of the 5 largest trucking companies in the United States, and in January of 1986, it filed for bankruptcy. At the time, it was the biggest trucking failure the country had ever seen. So, how does a top 5 carrier die? The easy answer is sitting right there on the door. McLean. The man who started the company, Malcolm McLean, is the same man who pioneered the modern shipping container. The steel boxes that emptied the old piers, broke the longshoremen, and rebuilt the way freight moves around the planet. So, the line writes itself. The box that gutted the waterfront circled back and gutted the trucking company too. It didn't. By the time McLean Trucking went under, Malcolm McLean hadn't owned a share of it in 31 years. The container story can't explain what happened here. The man behind the box had walked away from these trucks before most of their drivers ever signed on. And the reason he built that box gets cleaned up too. The famous version is true as far as it goes. A young McLean in 1937 parked at a dock in Hoboken, watching dock workers carry his freight off the truck by hand, one piece at a time, burning a whole day waiting. That stuck with him. But by the time he turned it into a real plan in the early 1950s, it had a harder edge. He wanted to drive his own loaded trailers straight onto ships and run them up and down the Atlantic coast. And a big part of the reason was to get his trucks off the federally regulated highways. In those years, the Interstate Commerce Commissions controlled nearly everything a trucker could do: which routes you were allowed to run, what you were allowed to charge, whether you were allowed to compete at all. McLean was a trucking man strangling on those rules, and the ocean was a way around them. The most important shipping idea of the century started, in part, as a regulatory dodge by a fed-up truck operator. He was one of them long before he became the man who left. And the law made him leave. Federal rules wouldn't let a single company own both a trucking line and a shipping line. To chase the box, McLean couldn't keep the company with his name on the door. So, in 1955, he sold McLean Trucking outright, somewhere around $6 million, and gave up the double diamond completely. He didn't drift out of trucking. He was forced to pick one, and he picked the box. His name stayed bolted to the side of a company he no longer owned, ran, or had any say over. Whatever happened to it after that would happen under his name and entirely out of his hands, none of which is what killed it. And it was never the trucks. The most valuable thing McLean Trucking owned was never its fleet. It was paper. Under the ICC, you couldn't just decide to haul freight between 2 cities. You needed operating rights, government permission to serve that exact route. And those rights were kept scarce on purpose. The scarcity is what made them worth real money. For the man behind the wheel, it wasn't an abstraction at all. The lane he ran was a lane the law had handed to his company and almost no one else. A rival couldn't undercut the rate and take that freight, because a rival wasn't allowed on the road to begin with. The route was the business. So McLean didn't get big by buying trucks. It got big by buying other carriers to take over their permissions. American Trucking in 1945, PD Express in 1947, Simpson Motor Lines in 1948, Heron Transportation after that. When it bought one of those companies, what it was really paying for wasn't their equipment or their terminals. It was their place in the federal lattice. their right to exist on a stretch of map. Stack enough of those rights together, and a regional hauler turns into a national one. On the books, each of them was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, for one reason. The government had made them impossible to get any other way. Then, in 1980, the Motor Carrier Act tore the whole system down. The barriers came off. Anybody with a rig and a license could go after the freight, and the road authority that companies like McLean had spent decades and fortunes stockpiling lost almost all of its worth. The value didn't slide. It dropped close to zero. Now the road that had belonged to McLean by federal grant was open to anyone who wanted it. The protection was the business, and the protection was gone. The foundation under the company didn't crack. It simply wasn't there anymore. For shippers and for the country, deregulation was a gift. Lower rates, more carriers, more choice. For a company built on regulatory scarcity itself, it pulled the floor out from under the whole operation. A weakened giant with its main asset wiped out is exactly what a certain kind of buyer goes hunting for. In 1982, a Dallas holding company called the Wedge Group took control of McLean. The men who'd given that company years had their own way of describing what came next. They said Wedge sold off the assets. They said it drained all the good out of the company. There's a difference between a buyer who wants to run a company and a buyer who wants to take it apart, and the men on the dock believed they knew which kind had walked in. Those are the workers' words, not a courtroom's, but the numbers don't argue. The losses came fast and got worse. $12.4 million in 1982, $35.2 million in 1983, $39 million in 1984. And here's the part that ought to stay with you. In 1985, with the company bleeding out, the workers agreed to a 15% pay cut, a condition the lenders demanded before they'd put up the money to keep it breathing. The Double Diamond men handed back a piece of their own paycheck to save an outfit that, the way they saw it, had already been hollowed out by the people who'd bought it. It bought them nothing. In January of 1986, McLean Trucking filed Chapter 11, the largest bankruptcy in the history of American trucking up to that day. That ought to be the end of it. It isn't. Malcolm McLean had come back, and he'd come back big. In 1978, he'd bought United States Lines, a shipping company, and bet everything he had on a fleet of huge new vessels he called econ ships, built on purpose to run slow and burn less fuel, on the bet that oil would stay expensive for good. It didn't. When fuel prices dropped, his fuel-sipping giants were just slow boats, and slow loses money on the water the same way it does on a mountain grade. That same November, 11 months after the trucking company with his name on it collapsed, United States Lines filed for bankruptcy too. Within 12 months, his name died on the road, and his comeback went down at sea.